Bit of a lag. Hi, and welcome to Third Floor Views, a production of Chesapeake Family Life, where we talk about health, education, and living with kids. I'm your host, Laura Boycourt. Today, we'll be talking about all things homeschooling, and joining us is homeschool advocate, educational consultant, and founder of the Maryland Homeschool Association, Alessa Giampaolo Keener. Also with us today are Nicole Kennedy Green, a veteran homeschool parent, author, and co-director of Extend Homeschool Tutorial, and Brittany Young, a Maryland mother now in her third year of homeschooling. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So I'd like to jump in with you, Alessa. Could you give us your background in education, how you came to be involved with an advocate for homeschooling, and then lastly, what is the Maryland Homeschool Association?
Okay, well, again, thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here with Brittany and Nicole also. I started my homeschool journey back in 1999, so it's been a minute. My oldest had just started kindergarten, and after a couple of months, it was clear that a public magnet school was actually not going to meet the needs of our family. And so after doing a little bit of research, soul searching, we jumped in and started our homeschool journey. Few years after that, I found myself to be a single parent homeschooler, and I decided to actually go back to school myself. So I got a master's in education from Johns Hopkins, and I focused on curriculum development as well as educational testing and assessment of children who don't go to traditional brick and mortar schools. My advocacy work started back in around 2003, maybe, when it was clear that we didn't have a statewide homeschool advocacy organization that was actively working to monitor what was happening at the state level, either in Annapolis at the Maryland General Assembly or at the Maryland State Department of Education. And we had an incident where the entire homeschool community was caught off guard with a regulation that was being put forth with no input from the homeschool community. And it was at that point that I realized, okay, well, gosh, oh golly, somebody's got to step up and start, reading through all these bills and monitoring the minutes that are coming out of MSDE. And so that was kind of like how the Maryland Homeschool Association started. It is just a grassroots, all volunteer. We are secular, we are inclusive. It's an organization that is all about helping parents understand their rights and responsibilities when it comes to homeschooling.
Perfect. And that's a great segue to my next question. I know everyone on the panel knows this, but for our viewers and listeners, what is homeschooling exactly? What are the state regulations? What are the responsibilities of caregivers in homeschooling?
So homeschooling is just basically, it's a form of school choice. It is where a parent elects to take full responsibility to educate their children at home. They have full authority to select the curriculum that they want to use for their children. And with that comes the responsibility of paying for it all on their own. That is a double-edged sword. Even though we don't actually have a law in Maryland that states this, Maryland is considered an all or nothing state for homeschooling, which means that once you submit your notice of intent to homeschool to your local county, you no longer are eligible for your child to participate in after-school activities, sports. You can't take any classes on a part-time basis. Special education services it's handled a little differently because that actually, stems from federal law. But in general, once you begin to homeschool, you can pretty much expect to no longer receive the full complement of special education services that your child would otherwise receive if they were in a public school. So in Maryland, we don't actually have a law that makes homeschooling legal. We do have state regulations that do have the same effect as law. Excuse me, but it's just like any other school choice. If a parent decides to go for private school, religious school, online school, it's just another option that's available for parents to select for their kids' needs.
Wonderful, thank you. And I read recently that the Maryland State Department of Education reported that roughly, I think, 4.6 of K-12 public school population students were being homeschooled late in 2020. I would expect that there was a significant jump during COVID. I wasn't sure if you were aware of any data now, COVID years up to now, where that percentage might stand.
Oh, yeah. So I've been tracking homeschool statistics for more than 20 years. So back in oh my gosh, your golly, 2002, perhaps, there was maybe about 21,000 homeschooled children. Right before COVID struck in March of 2020, we were just under 28,000. So really not that big of a growth year to year. It was growing about maybe 2 to 3%. Some years we actually saw a decrease in numbers. Some years we saw a much bigger increase. But once COVID hit, our homeschool numbers jumped over, oh my gosh, it was over 40,000 children
Wow.
that really they came from either public schools or some kind of private school option where the parents formally submitted their notice of intent to officially homeschool. A lot of families thought that they were homeschooling when they were still at home during COVID with all the school supports. But once they
Right,
chose
yeah.
to do it, all those online portals that they had access to were gone, because remember, we're all or nothing. And so the numbers keep increasing, surprisingly. So we were expecting to see families to re-enroll their children back into public school once vaccines became available, mask mandates started to be taken away. But we actually, Maryland State Department of Education just released their 2022 homeschool statistics, and we are just a few kids shy of 45,000
Wow.
Maryland children who are homeschooling. So yes, some counties did see a dip. I think it was, let me think here, St. Mary's County and Queen Anne's County saw some significant drops. But Anne Arundel County and Allegheny County, of all places, actually saw still 30% increases in homeschool children and
Wow.
homeschool enrollments.
Wow.
So
Huh.
there's no rhyme or reason to why some counties are doing it more so than others.
That's fascinating. Thanks for the updated statistics. Nicole, I'd like to turn to you. Could you tell us about your journey as a homeschool parent? How did you first get involved in it? Maybe what are some of the highs and lows that you experienced along the way? And then lastly, if you could tell us a little bit about Extend Homeschool Tutorial.
Absolutely. And again, thank you so much for having me. I started homeschooling. We lived in the Midwest, so we weren't in Maryland. I have 3 children. My oldest was born here, and then we moved to the Midwest for my husband to go to school and start his career, to extend his career a little bit out there. And in the small town we lived in, about 3 hours south of Chicago, there was some major upheaval with public housing in the Chicago area, and in this one of the places that population was sent. They gave them some choices of where they can move, and one of the places they were sent was to the small town in East Central Illinois that we lived in. And as a result, our school district, and my daughter was 4, our school district got a 30% increase in school population with no extra state funds for more teachers, more school buildings, any more resources. And I had been a kindergarten teacher. So, and I was staying home with her, and I was carrying number 2, pregnant with number 2. And we just moved into our neighborhood, and our neighbor who worked for the school district introduced herself. We're out on a walk one day or something, and she introduced herself, and she said to me that she worked for the school district. And if I had options to if I had choices, I guess if I was flexible, start considering my options, because thinking about when my daughter would start kindergarten, she would probably be in a kindergarten class of 37 to 42 kids. And I almost died, because I could not imagine myself teaching a kindergarten class of any more than 24 or 25. And so I thought, what on earth, right? And when we went to inquire about the school, and we talked, of course, you buy your house in the school district that you want to live in. So when I went to inquire about the school, the administration was able to forecast her incoming kindergarten class at 37 2 kindergartens, 37 students each, with 1 paraprofessional between the 2 of them. And it looks like the majority of this incoming class are boys. And I thought, no, I can do kindergarten. You know, I thought I can do kindergarten. I know I can do K-3. That's how I taught. And so we just decided we'd start with kindergarten, you know? And so we didn't have some big revelation, you know, it wasn't one of those, you know, things, you know, people will tell you, you know, they woke up we didn't have a crisis. There was no bullying. There wasn't a thus saith the Lord. There was none of those things people will tell you that started them homeschooling. And we have just continued each year. One characteristic of our family is for work or school, we've moved a lot. We're not military, but we kind of have moved like military folks. And each year, the consistency of me being their main teacher and administrator has been just a wonderful benefit to my children. It's just been a great thing for them. And so as we moved on through our journey, we lived in Illinois, we've moved back to Maryland, we lived in New Jersey, we went back to Illinois, we've lived in Maryland again. And so with all the changes, we've been able to keep consistent. At this point, I have an 11th grader, a 16-year-old junior, 11th grader who is my last one. I have 2 in college. I have my daughter will be 22 next week, and I have an 18-year-old. Also, they're both in college, and they've been K-12 homeschool, right? Always from beginning, and it's been a wonderful journey for us. That we have been able to, you know, early on we'd ask them every year, does everybody want to keep homeschooling? And, you know, they wanted to, and we had that thing that happens. Sometimes the kids see the school bus and they're intrigued by it. They want to get on the bus, right? And then, so one time we were going on a field trip, we were going out of town, going on a trip, and the kids were on the school bus. It was 7:05. I would never forget it. 7:05 a.m. It was foggy and cold. And the school bus drove by us and all the kids were in the corner. And I said, y'all want to do this? They said, absolutely not. So we never had that. We never revisited the school bus conversation again. And so our journey has been one of, you know, just trying to be consistent and give our kids what they need. As you Alessa could probably tell you this, I am an extrovert, and when I take all of those quizzes, I'm extreme extrovert, right? So I'm in all the conversations, and I work the room when I go. It's my personality. I have also raised 3 extroverts, and my husband is a people person introvert. Even my dog is an extrovert, right? So I always knew that I needed community everywhere. So in some places that meant I joined communities already in session and added, you know, to them. In other places, it means I've started something because we found ourselves in a space where there was no community, or at least not in my immediate area where I was willing to drive to or whatever. And then most recently with Extend, my friend who I didn't even really know very well at the time, Kim Kent, she really felt like she needed something that could bring together all the best of the communities that she had been a part of. She wanted to bring all of that together. She felt very strongly she should start her own. And so she approached me one time and she said, hey, will you consider doing this with me? I feel like you have the personality to work with me. You know, we call it her crazy train, you know, so you got to work with her. She's, you know, a dynamic individual, and we work very well together as a team. So in 2015, Extend Homeschool Tutorial began as Bridge Elementary. And so we started with Bridge Elementary, and Bridge Elementary served 1st through 6th grade, 6th grade at the time. My oldest was a 6th grader, was going to be a 6th grader. So he was the oldest. My youngest was going to be a 6th grader at the time. And as the kids got older, the community asked us to please continue to grow. Right. When we ended at 6th grade, some families had kids in 2 different tutorials, and they were going to different places and doing co-ops trying to meet the needs of their families. So we continued to grow with them. And during COVID, we ended up with 2 or 3 sections of each class. So usually we have one, like, you know, we do all the cores, right? And now music, art, and PE. But we used to have 1 1st grade English, 1 1st grade math, right? That kind of thing. But during COVID, we ended up with 2 or 3 sections teaching, you know, on the opposite days when we were not meeting because we were virtual. So we had more time for that. And then in 2020, we expanded. In 2021, we expanded into high school. So now Extends, we changed our name to Extend, and now we serve 1st through 12th grade. And I currently serve as the high school coordinator. So I'm kind of the principal of the high school. We're in 2 buildings that are very close to each other, and it's been a wonderful journey. We're coming the Green family is coming close to the end because, like I said, we have a junior now. And so I'm moving into more consulting, working on helping people plan their college plan, getting ready for college. But my journey has been a wonderful one, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. There are some rough patches. You get tired of your kids. They get tired of you, you wonder where the bus is. Sometimes you want to put them on the school bus. You get that, you feel that way. Everybody feels that way. But it's been a wonderful experience that I would not trade for anything. And I always tell folks, if you can, do it, right? When we had parents, Alessa we were talking about the growth over COVID. When we had parents who came to us during COVID, several of them needed a way out because they didn't like how the schools were going back in. We're in Prince George's County, and a lot of it was just not liking the way the schools were going back in, not trusting the vaccine, not wanting, just the things that all the families everywhere, everybody's families was going through the same thing. But when it came to the tutorial model, which I don't know if you're familiar, Laura, but it's sometimes there's 1 day a week, sometimes it's 2, where the parents pay tuition, they bring their kids, they can drop them off. The drop-off thing is big. That model appealed to families who were trying to make a transition from a traditional school setting. There were whole private schools that closed in our area because they could not make the pivot to virtual. They didn't know how they were going to be able to stay open. So we got large swaths of population from some of the smaller private schools. And when it became time for them to go back in, is the expression we use, many of them stayed with us. They really realized that the homeschool model, especially with the support of a tutorial setting, was a better option for their family. So we've been very excited and feel fortunate and very blessed to be able to serve so many families. We started with 68 children, which that was phenomenal to us just starting out. People didn't know us, but they trusted our model. And now we're close, very much closer to 200. So it's a small school now, it feels like sometimes, but it's been a wonderful journey. And I think my family's experience has been enriched by not only me having a place to work out, use my skill set and build some more skills and use my giftings, but also the social interaction is always there. They're not missing anything. We have proms and dances and group graduations and all of that. It's been a wonderful, wonderful experience for us.
I'm so glad. That sounds like a tremendous journey, and wonderful resources and consistency that you provided to your children and to other people's children as well. So you're on one end of this, and Brittany, if I understand correctly, you're a little bit you're on the beginning stages of yours. I believe you're three years into your journey.
Yep, I'm 3 years in.
Could you tell us a little bit about what sort of spurred you on to look into homeschooling and how it's been going for you?
Yeah, sure. So I always say that this is definitely a God journey for me because I never thought that I'd be homeschooling my kids. We are part of that 40,000 that Alessa was talking about of pandemic homeschoolers. So we turned to homeschooling during the pandemic. At the time, I was a 5th grade reading and language arts teacher, and I had so I have boy-girl twins. They are now 8 years old, and then I have a 9-year-old. So at the time when the pandemic hit, I had 2 kids in pre-K 4, and then I had a 1st grader. They had to be on their virtual learning on their screens, and I had to be on my screen with my students. And I had a nervous breakdown. And in the midst of all of that, we were already, before the pandemic hit, we were already talking about putting all of our kids in a different school. And so my mom actually brought it to my attention. She was like, well, why don't you just take them all out and homeschool them? And I'm like, what? I homeschool? That is not me. No, ma'am. But the more that I thought about it and researched it, and I had another friend who was already going down that lane. And I said, okay, well, if you're going to do it, then I'll join you in doing it. And then another friend also. So the 3 of us were like, okay, we're going to do this all together. And that's how we came to homeschooling. Now, that first year of fully homeschooling, not virtual learning, like fully being homeschooled kids, I was still working. So we hired somebody to come in, and my husband is a recruiter for the DC Army National Guard. So he's full-time military for the DC Army National Guard. So we're working full-time, and we had to hire somebody to come in and work with our kids, and we were using the Abeka curriculum. Quickly, my oldest, it did not work for him. And then the younger two, the teacher that we brought in, they were okay because she was focusing mostly with them because they were the younger ones. So by that time, I had transitioned from being the 5th grade reading and language arts teacher to the learning specialist at my school, because my background is in both gen ed and special ed. And so it was just paining me. And I was telling my husband, like, I want to come home and do this. I should be the one doing this. And through lots of talks and discussions, he finally was like, okay, let's do it. And so then I came home full time. So now we went into our 2nd year of homeschooling. We left the Abeka curriculum behind and went with easy peasy all-in-one homeschool. So we started with that. And I just, it was working, like we were, checking all the boxes, doing all the curriculum things, but my kids, there was just no joy and freedom and inspiration. And there was no connection, because one of my sons, actually, he would hide under the table. He would become really resistant, cry. And one day he told me, Mom, I'm going to run away. And that broke my heart, because as a special ed teacher, I was like, I've worked with so many different kids and I've been able to connect with them. I can't connect with my son. And in homeschooling, like, I came home to connect with you. And so that's when I started just researching different strategies and ways to homeschool. And that's when I found out about unschooling and the world of self-directed learning. And that has really worked for us, and has brought so much freedom and inspiration and connection for us, because now that same son who used to run away when I pulled out the reading and writing book, curriculum books, now, through our journey of deschooling and now venturing into unschooling, he's the one that's like, okay, Mom, I like playing my video games and my Roblox games, but I have to do more reading with them. So can you help me? And like, when he said that to me, I had to like stay calm, like, okay, don't leave school. He might change his mind. And he now wakes me up every morning to do our little reading lesson. And that has been like so eye-opening to me and fascinating to me because of my background in education as well. And I never heard anything about self-directed learning in all of my years of education for myself and going into the world of education. So it's been a fascinating journey. And that kind of tells you a little bit about where we've come from and where we are now.
And just briefly, unschooling or self-directed schooling, or I guess learning, what does that look like on a daily basis? What might an average day of that be in terms of parental direction?
So there is no average day. It really is about letting the child be the curriculum. They are the curriculum, and really being so in tune with who they are and what they're doing and what they're interested in, and then kind of laying out different things that based on what you're seeing they're interested in. For example, my daughter was watching something and spoke about wanting to learn how to sew. And so as a mom and being in tune with her interest, I'm like, okay, now we're going to find you maybe a sewing class, or she now sews with her aunt on every Monday. One of my sons, noticing that he's really into building and mechanics and engineering. So bringing out more Legos for him to do that, and allowing learning through life as well. We cook a lot together, bake a lot. My mom and I, we have a business where we do cooking classes for kids anyway. So we're always cooking and baking together. There's a lot of math and reading in that. So there's one day doesn't look like the other all the time. But it's been amazing to see and to experience the freedom, the inspiration, and the connection. Like I said, I had 3 kids really quickly, really fast. I had 3 babies really fast, and I'm also pregnant with our 4th now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And so for me, it was really hard during those times when I had 3 babies. And so, I loved my babies, but it was such a machine, being mommy machine, that I didn't enjoy it. So for me to say that I enjoy being home with my kids is truly a journey.
Absolutely. And before we move on to some Census Bureau and MDSE data, quickly, what is PG County Genius Community? I know that you're the director of that, Brittany.
Yes. So the Genius schools are micro schools. So we're part of a network of micro schools, and the Genius community, the vision is to help kids, our learners, find their passion by focusing on creating good experiences. And that those good experiences and once you find your passion and your purpose, that culminates in them solving industry, community, and global problems. And so we do that also by inviting them to participate in our 5 pillars of knowing themselves, knowing their source, like their mental, emotional, physical well-being, knowing how to be financially self-sustainable, knowing their world and their environment, and then being able to serve their community with their genius. So right now we meet on Wednesdays. We do Genius Community Wednesdays. And next school year, we are inventing the possibility of having a 5-day-a-week drop-off space, self-directed learning space that also invites kids to participate in those 5 pillars.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. I wanted to make sure to get that in. So Nicole, the Census Bureau reported a significant rise in African-American families switching to homeschooling from, I believe, 3% in 2020 to 16.1 in 2021. I would imagine, as we talked about before, that one of the reasons, was COVID, as it was for so many families. But I was wondering if you could speak to the growth in African-American families homeschooling in Maryland, and then maybe Alessa, if you chime in with some of that new data that you were able to look at recently, that would be great.
Sure. So I think, well, I don't think this, I know. When we first started homeschooling ourselves, of course, we didn't start in Maryland, we started in Illinois. We were the only African-American family for miles. Like I could not find another African-American family. There was, we lived in a town that was 45 minutes from a college town, and there were 2 families there that had African-American children, but they were not African-American parents. So we had a hard time, I was hard pressed to find other families that looked like ours as time, and that was in, I want to say 2005-ish. So as time has gone on and the word has spread, and there have been pioneers. One of my mentors has kids in her 40s, and they're in their 40s, and her kids went to Ivy schools, and she homeschooled them. So we're not necessarily the pioneers, but the uptick around COVID, I think, has a lot to do with. I attribute it to a couple things. So the point I was making was that we have grown steadily in terms of our participation in homeschooling, but I think the uptick has, I would attribute it to a couple things around COVID. The first one is, as I had alluded to before, some schools have closed, right? So where African-American families may have not had their children enrolled in public schools, but they were in smaller private settings, especially in PG County, for example, some of the smaller Christian schools closed because they were not equipped to make some of the pivots and make some of the changes. Another thing I think is there were economic reasons, right? So it made more sense if one of the parents now found themselves underemployed because of COVID, or there were family situations going on where it made more sense financially for a parent to be home, then that was something else that they were able to do. But then I think what Brittany shared about her own family is also another reason, is that the pandemic made us kind of everybody, not just African Americans, but kind of stop and look at our lives, right? Think about our families and think about how the going to school of it all has affected us, and so the same way some people have pivoted their employment, people have made changes, that great, what they call it, the great resignation. People have made changes in whether I don't want to go out to work anymore. I want more work-life balance. I want to be able to work from home and all of that. I think that has attributed too. I think some people have literally awakened to the idea that there are many many options when it comes to schooling, for educating our children, and homeschooling, it works. So on top of the not trusting or being kind of leery about the vaccine and not, and watching people go back to school and then large numbers of kids coming home with COVID in the first couple of weeks of a school year. And, all of that has kind of drawn people's attention to what the options are. And then knowing that there are options makes us look and see what options fit our families. The other thing I was going to say too is that I think African Americans, of course, we're not a monolith, so this is not you can't make a gross generalization here, but I think it's okay to say culturally, we tend to have our family units tend to be larger in the sense that mom and dad and children are not all there are. So Brittany spoke to how her mom had some input in her thinking about homeschooling. We have this other background of family who's there to support. So where mom and dad may both have to work, there's often a grandma or an aunt or a granddad who can do drop-offs and pickups, where we have a lot of support in our families who, once we get them on board, and sometimes that's tough, right? You have to explain, yes, people did fight for us to be able to go to school, but right now this is a different time and we need to be able to do this differently. Once we can get past that, a lot of times we tend to have the family support that allows doing this to really be an option for our families. And so COVID just helped us to refocus, to rethink, to draw our attention back inside our homes. And it's been amazing to watch the number of people. Extend tutorial is not necessarily, we're not distinctly African-American, but our population is largely African-American because we're in PG County and because it's just been a place where our families have found the support that they need, and it's just been great. So I think that we'll see the numbers continue to grow. I don't think that we've reached a plateau. And again, Alessa could speak to the statistics better than I can, but I don't think we've reached a plateau. I think the numbers are going to continue to grow. Innovations like the Genius School, and I know Karima Green, I think Brittany are you connected with Karima?
Akila.
Yes, so that innovations like that are gonna just blow it out. People are gonna, once we learn, the more we learn about our options, the more we will take advantage of them. So I'm excited about it. As my family is on our way out, so many other families are on their way in, and it's very, very exciting for me.
That's wonderful. So Alessa, any data from MDSE?
So yes, the Maryland State Department of Education has started to collect data on different racial groups as well as gender, numbers, subgroups within the total number of kids who are being homeschooled. We don't have a lot of historical data to compare it to. So, but if we take a look at what has been reported in other news media over the last 10 years, we know that the increase in African-American homeschoolers predates COVID, which I think is a great thing. I think that in part has happened because we are beginning to have a different way that we are shedding a light on who makes up homeschooling and why people are homeschooling. It's not just a bunch of white ultra conservative religious people who homeschool. That is an old trope that that's tired. Outdated. It needs to be arrested. Yes. We know that has not been the truth for a long time, and the media is finally beginning to help us make sure that we have a broader sense of why people are choosing to homeschool. I think also, unfortunately, the increase in gun violence in schools, safety issues, is another factor that is pushing folks to homeschool. That is not just related to African Americans. That is, across the board. There's an intersection of reasons for why people are choosing to homeschool. Another big one is that special ed needs are not necessarily being met as well in public schools. And unfortunately, we do know that African-American children with special education needs tend to get less adequate services than their white student counterparts. And I think that we have seen over the years that we have a number of our Black families who are leaving the schools because they're like, you know what, my kid needs good education and I can do better than what the schools are doing. Right. And it just winds up being less of an emotional challenge to just embrace homeschooling than to continue to fight the school, trying to get them to do what they should be doing with those IEPs. So the reasons why I think we are seeing that increase goes beyond just COVID. But it's fascinating because Prince George's County, when we look at the disaggregated racial data, over 53% of the children in Prince George's County are African American. And that's not even considering if they identify as two or more races. That is just the pure identity there. So that's wonderful. That far exceeds, Laura, the data point that you offered earlier. Baltimore County is up to 22%. Anne Arundel County is only at 8%. Now, I haven't taken the time to really dig in into census data to see how that compares to the otherwise makeup of the students that we have in those, and the number of families that we have, if it's proportional, if it exceeds the proportion. But those numbers are really reassuring, to know that more and more families see this as a viable option that can support their right to have a school choice that will work for their children.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Can I
Thank
add
you.
something?
Yeah,
Can I add
sure.
something to that, Lauren? I was just thinking, I have friends who have started communities for African American families all over the country. One that comes to mind in particular is a friend who started a school called Black Homeschooler, a program, Black Homeschoolers of Birmingham. So she's in Alabama. And another one of Alessa's points, having the support of community, I kind of alluded to this before, also helps. When I started homeschooling, I was alluding to this before, when I started homeschooling in Illinois, we were the only ones. And so, but when you find your people, right? Does that make sense? When you find your village, when you find that you're not the only one, I think it lights a fire and to say, hey, we can do this, and more of us can do this. All of the reasons Alessa named, the not having enough support for special ed and all of the other things. One thing that you didn't mention, Alessa, that I thought of and I feel very strongly about is the way school resource officers are used in schools, and how African American children are disproportionately affected by schools that have police officers in the schools. And that's a PG County thing like everywhere else. That it is those reasons make us, like Alessa said, I think we become brave, and we start to think, if like Brittany said, she and two other friends did it, I'll do it if you do it. And you know the expression, if you build it, they'll come, right? And we've found that, it helps us all be brave. We just need a little bit more support. And support doesn't only come from within our community, because there are others who see you are absolutely have gotten the short end of the stick, and funding and all kind of other resources. So it's been great to see, not just in our area, not just in Maryland, not just in our county, not just in our state, but also around the country, how wonderful the growth in finding these options for our families has been.
So when I began homeschooling, Google didn't even exist. This is really dating myself. Social Facebook had not been even thought of at that point in time. And to add to what Nicole just said, finding community is important, and that is a good thing about social media, is that you can find it. Back when I started, we had email lists. We were picking up copies of Chesapeake Family and the Penny Saver, if you even can remember what the Penny Saver was, to look for those public announcements of saying, oh, if you homeschool, give me a call on a telephone. So you could find those groups. And now all you got to do is go to, Facebook and type in Maryland homeschool, and then bingo, you can find, maybe 24, and Maryland's a small state, at least 24 different homeschool groups that is very specific either to, your religious leaning, or secular, if that is your case, or, if you're looking for, specifically African American or unschooling, like it's very specific to each geography, the counties, and to find that support, like Brittany and Nicole spoke to, it's so much easier, and it gives you that sense of, I can do this.
Yeah.
Brittany, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly add, one reason why my African American family also chose to homeschool or continue to homeschool was I have 2 Black boys, and I'm pregnant with another Black boy. And in our nation, we have not always valued Black bodies. And so to be able to bring my kids home, my boys home, and speak life into them every day and remind them that they are powerful, that they are intelligent, that is one reason why I continue to homeschool. Because it is my hope that my kids and their kids and their kids will shift, our nation.
Change the narrative.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, thank you for bringing that up, and that's so well said. Thank you for bringing that up. So as we're getting closer to wrapping things up, I guess I'd like to, before we end, address some of the possible misconceptions that families might have, families who are considering this. What are some things that they might find surprising that you guys have experienced in your journeys? Alessa, do you want to start?
Sure, thank you. So I think, one of the biggest misconceptions is that homeschool is really only just about education, when in reality, it truly is a lifestyle choice.
Mm-hmm.
You have to like being around your children if you want to homeschool. I'm sure many parents have said, I can't wait for September to start so I can put the kids on the school bus, and get back to life. And I know that that's said, tongue in cheek a lot of times. But if that truly is your sense, then maybe homeschooling might not be the right choice, because you gotta like your kids, you gotta like spending time with them. You have to rethink, what your role is in terms of putting on your mom hat, and then taking that off and then putting on your homeschool mom hat, because they are different roles in terms of the dynamics and the way that your family is going to be able to get along. Another really common misconception is that, if you choose to homeschool, that you think that all your education is going to be happening at home, at your kitchen table, or if you're able to set up your own schoolroom, for 7 to 8 hours a day. No, that is so, I know that that's what brick and mortar schools do. And, public schools serve a very important purpose in our society. And I am not at all anti-public school. I am pro-school reform, but I don't want anybody to think that I think public schools should go away or be defunded. I don't think so at all. But at the same time, they're not necessarily set up to meet children where they are developmentally. And so I unschooled my kids also, like Brittany did, in a slightly different way, but there's a lot of great things that can happen very actively. Back when I began homeschooling, we actively worked with museums to help them begin to understand how they can create specific programming for homeschoolers, especially in September when their museums are closed. And now we have a wonderful array of programs across the state, actually across the country, but specifically in Maryland, lots of community-based learning opportunities, and so homeschooling, can be traditional, books, book learning, like, that we've always had. It can be 100% online, it can be a combination, but that is the misconception that I think is important for parents to understand. It's not just sitting at home, it's a total misnomer. Homeschooling happens everywhere. We joke a lot about car schooling, because you're so busy driving, from activity to activity, that you have to learn how to make the most of your time, even when you're in the car. And that's important. And I think the last misconception that is really important that has come up recently, mostly because of COVID, is that micro schooling actually really isn't homeschooling. We've always had co-ops. Co-ops have been an integral part of homeschooling, because, we always wanted our kids to be socialized, and so getting them together and sharing teaching responsibilities has been important. But Maryland does have a law that defines what a school is. And when you start having kids come together in an outside location being taught by other people for the majority of their education, then you have left homeschooling behind, and you've moved back into a traditional school model, which is fine. It's just another school choice, but that stops being homeschooling, and that just becomes a form of non-public school education. And Maryland State Department of Education has been very hands-off with really looking at when co-ops cross that line between being a homeschool co-op and becoming an unofficial school. But I suspect that's going to change as we see children not being re-enrolled into public schools because they have a financial interest in making sure that things are done by the laws. And laws can change. Families can certainly go to Annapolis and work to get those laws changed, so that way there will become an officially different and distinct school choice that might be available. But those are some of those misconceptions that I see that are out there.
I think can I jump in here?
Yes, ma'am.
That was a perfect segue to what I was going to say. I think that the tutorial model of homeschooling, which is what Extend is set up. So we have classes, kids come to us 2 days a week, and it's a la carte. So it's not every class. It's not, we don't, we have each of our tutors, we don't call them teachers, but each tutor presents material, and then the parents spend the majority of their time Monday, Wednesday, Friday at home doing the homeschooling. We don't provide oversight. We, in the high school level, we do assessments to kind of provide grades, but that is very loose, especially in Ms. Green's classes. But parents are still 100% accountable to the county. And a big misconception I think that parents have sometimes about homeschooling is twofold in that lane. Number one, people seem to think that Maryland is heavily regulated, and with all things considered, we are not. There's maps out there you can look at that they regulated, they use regulation like it's green, which there's no regulation, how we were in Illinois, very loosely regulated, all the way up to like a dark orange or red, which is like New York State, which is almost oppressively regulated. And Maryland is a very easy state to homeschool in if you have to understand the code. And Alessa is very good about that. Understand what COMAR says, know what you have to do and what you don't have to do, know what you can do and what you can't do. And then it's not very difficult. Along those same lines, though, people tend to want to, and I think it's just culturally how Americans are taught to educate our families. People tend to want to abdicate their children's responsibility, their children's education to someone else. Again, as Alessa said before, Maryland is an all or nothing state. If you're homeschooling, you are in charge, which means you are fully responsible, right? And so parents have to know that you are taking on a huge responsibility when it comes to homeschooling your children. It is I call it an all-consuming fire. You are in charge of this thing. You can get help, you can outsource some things, but you are really in charge of it. And so if your goal is to come out of this situation, like remove from one situation just to abdicate to another one, homeschooling is probably not what you're doing. It's very important for people to understand that. And there's lots of us out here who can help clarify that. And there's no judgment either way. We just need clarity, right? Yeah.
If I might, before Brittany jumps in with her input on misconceptions, I think it might be really important to also add in terms of legally, in the state of Maryland, when a parent decides to homeschool, they are also agreeing to submit to up to 3 portfolio reviews each year. And that can either be done through their county Department of Education, or they can pay to do it privately through what we call an umbrella. And a portfolio review essentially is only looking to see if the parent has provided regular, thorough instruction in the courses normally taught to kids of the same age. And those courses are actually very specifically identified, and it includes 4 core courses, and that would be math, reading, science, and social studies, as well as 4 what we call specials, if you will, and that's art, music, phys ed, and health. And so that is an important thing to remember, that Maryland is not tracking to see if a homeschool child is actually learning, which is very different compared to, say, a state like Virginia, where homeschool parents have to demonstrate proof of progress, but there is accountability that must be met, and it's done through that portfolio review.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you added that. Thank you so much. Brittany, did you want to address any of the misconceptions?
Yeah, just quickly. Well, first, I just want to honor Alessa and Nicole and all of their knowledge and veteranship and all of that. They are the experts here. But I'd imagine that another misconception is that, I honor and acknowledge my privilege in being able to be at home while my husband works full time, right? And so I believe that another misconception is that you have to be able to make enough money so that one parent can stay home in order to homeschool your kids, or in order for your kids to learn in freedom, to have school choice, like Alessa was talking about. And I think that the beauty of having school choice is that there are spaces where you don't have to, make a bunch of money so that one person can stay home. Or if you are a single parent and you have to figure it out because you have to work full time and you need to drop your kids off at a space, there are other school spaces where kids are allowed to learn in freedom or outside of your traditional school model. So I think that's, the beauty of what things are being invented, like Nicole was saying.
Absolutely. Well, as we get closer to wrapping things up, I'd like to go around one piece of advice you would give to parents considering a switch to homeschooling. And I know we've touched on this earlier in the conversation, but one piece of advice you would give them. Nicole, can we start with you?
Absolutely. My one piece of advice would be to continue to allow your family to have its own identity, right? So the Greens don't homeschool like maybe the Keeners did or like the Youngs do. Our family, even in places where we are in community with other people, we are still the Green family. And so homeschooling, I said this in my book, there are as many ways to homeschool as there are families doing it. Figure out your family's way. Write your mission statement, decide why you want to do it, how you're going to get it done. Be open to changing that as they get older because it changes, and just be yourselves. Every family can have their own identity in homeschooling, and I think it'll make your journey a whole lot more pleasant and enjoyable, and then you can look back more fondly on it if you've done that.
Brittany, what about you?
I was just going to say, so first of all, shout out to all of the amazing teachers and administrators in public schools, private schools, charter schools doing powerful, powerful work. But if you are considering homeschooling and you're afraid, like I was initially, just know that you have the power, no matter your background, you have the power to invent a new possibility for you and your family when it comes to learning in schools. You have the power to do it.
Alessa?
I think my great advice that Nicole and Brittany has already shared. So something a little different that I would share is that it's okay if you have a bad homeschool day. If your kids wake up and they're just like, absolutely not, I am not interested in doing any of this learning, you know what? It's okay. They're not going to fall behind. And maybe that's a really wonderful day to just, pack up, go outside, go for a walk, do something different. Because honestly, there's a lot of learning that don't fall within those 4 core courses that we have to show our regular thorough instruction in. That is still important learning that can happen. And so instead of yelling or punishing your child, and I know I did this once, maybe Nicole, maybe you did this once where you're like, don't make me pick up that phone and call the school so I am going to enroll you. That is the moment of frustration of you've reached your end, and that's okay. That's the signal of just take a break. Your kid is still going to be a functional adult. They're still going to be able to read and write and do the math that is going to, be necessary for life success, even if you decide that, this week is a wash, or just this day is a wash, and instead we're going to, go visit family or go for a walk in the woods, or, maybe just go to a museum because not for any other learning experience, but the kids love dinosaurs and they want to go see the dinosaurs again. And just allow the joy to come out, because if you have to yell to get your kids to learn or threaten them, then that's going to have a negative effect in the long run. So
Yeah.
focus on the joy and accept the fact that we all wake up some days where we just don't want to do what's on our to-do list. I know I do that as an adult, and as an adult I can have that privilege of being able to say, I'm gonna save cleaning the bathroom for tomorrow because I just my back, my arthritis in my back just is not up for today. And so let's give our kids the same grace that maybe they're waking up and maybe having the same kind of day, and helping them understand that self-care is just as an important skill to learn as the facts and the figures that we need them to learn, from our traditional book work.
Absolutely. Well, thank you to Alessa, Giampaolo Keener, Brittany Young, and Nicole Kennedy Green for this eye-opening conversation. I'm so glad we were able to shed some light on all the ways that learning is happening, the ways that it fits for different families. It's been a pleasure. And thank you to all of our viewers and listeners as well. Make sure you visit ChesapeakeFamily.com for up-to-date local information on home, health, and living for today's Maryland parent. This episode will be archived on ChesapeakeFamily.com in video and podcast format. I'm Laura Boycourt with Chesapeake Family Life and Third Floor Views. Thanks so much.